What are you going to say, Luke?
Oh no, I was going to say a point about The Rock, but it's gone now. Hello everyone, welcome to episode 9 of the Co-Conspirators podcast, with me, Luke, and my co-host, Calum.
Hello.
And John.
Hi everyone.
On the podcast, we like to take a look at conspiracies relevant in the news right now, but we also like to delve deeper into some historic conspiracies, and today we will be doing the latter and looking at conspiracies surrounding the moon landings. Before we start, we just want to say a massive thanks to everyone listening and everyone interacting with this podcast. A huge shout out to Sydney Calderon for her kind words, David for his very useful information, and both Careering Ginger and Bush Did Corona for their fine banter in the comments section. These podcasts are super fun for us to record, and to foreshadow the coming episode, we are over the moon that others have been listening. So, the moon has fascinated humans since the beginning of time. Many different ancient civilizations from different regions of the world all commonly worship the moon. China, amongst other countries, still today use a lunar-based calendar and celebrate lunar events. Yet despite all this, we still today don't know everything about the moon. Only the USA has sent manned missions to the moon, with Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins supposedly landing on the moon on the 20th of July 1969, with the last mission in 1972. Before landing on the moon, America was losing the space race to the communist Soviet Union, but without doubt, whoever landed on the moon first would win. America turned the tide and won the space race, but many are still skeptical, with 1 in 10 Americans believing the landings were faked. And I mean, I probably imagine that statistic is a lot higher in Russia and anti-American countries.
I think it's one of those things as well. If you were stopped in the street and asked, even if you thought it was fake, I don't think you're very likely to say that because there's a bit of stigma attached to it kind of thing. So the number's probably higher than that.
Typical like statistical survey, yeah. And then without doubt, there are some inconsistencies to the story, which Calum is going to touch on quite a bit. And the fact that we haven't been back in nearly 48 years also leaves many people with some dark conspiracies surrounding the moon. So before we actually jump into the conspiracies, I just want to leave a bit of food for thought. Obviously, landing on the moon was a massive feat and involved some of the greatest mathematicians, engineers, project managers, physicists, and so on in the world.
And the caterers.
Don't forget the caterers. Thanks, Calum. Everyone needs to be recognised. It truly is incredible that humans have stepped foot on the moon, especially considering what it came before. This is what always blows my mind when I consider the moon landings, is we were able to step foot on the moon before simple things, well, things that we consider simple today, such as ATMs, digital cameras, mobile phones, and so on. Of course, floods of dollars were chucked at the space race, but I still think it puts into perspective just how incredible the moon landings really were. How do you guys feel about that?
I suppose it's the one that always gets brought up. Your smartphone has more processing power than the entire computer banks that you use to send send the Apollo 11 to the moon, which is just baffling. Something that you take for granted every single day. You don't even think how powerful this device is.
Yeah, it is pretty mad. I also think, the fact we haven't been back is odd, but I think the argument behind it is they don't really see the need and it's really expensive, which, as you touched on, I think is why it happened earlier than perhaps other technologies emerged, because it was so heavily government kind of funded and backed. One thing that I've never really thought of before, but like you said, Russia were ahead in the space race and then obviously ultimately lost it. But you feel like they maybe would have gone anyway, like in the next 10 years, just to kind of say they've gone, especially after all that investment. I find it a little bit odd that they never went.
That's one of the reasons I find it odd as well. And obviously it's very, very expensive and only the most rich countries can travel to the moon. But I do find it also quite strange that a place like China hasn't tried to stake any kind of claim.
Yeah.
Weren't India trying to go into space? Or they trying for the man?
No, I think they were trying to put someone on the moon, but they haven't yet. Yeah, I heard that as well, that they wanted to do that.
I suppose we've got to also realise how risky it was. There were several people died in the lead up to the Apollo 11 program.
Yeah, there was like some sort of gas leak, wasn't there?
Yes, that was the one. And sort of a spark ignited it and they were just burnt alive. No way of escaping. There's also test flights that caused people to be killed, and there's a big human cost involved in the whole process. And they've learned from it, but they really want to be risking people spending all this money in this climate. That's really the argument against going back.
Yeah, and I do think it's a logical argument, but it definitely is very open to conspiracies just because of how it is. 48 years does seem like a long time not to want to go back and do something that kind of can showcase how powerful and how great your country's technology and its people are.
I suppose just to counter that, we did it in, US did it in 69. Is there really that much for technological advancement? We're going back to the moon when they had the technology all those years ago.
Well, you'd think so if it followed the natural trend. Technology is always exponential in how it develops. When you look at things like mobile phones, just in 10 years, how far they've come. So you would think if they kept up the same rate of development or even a less steep curve, that we would be incredibly advanced now and would be able to kind of nip to the moon and back with relative ease. But I suppose they just cut a lot of funding and didn't want to pursue it because it was just a case of getting there, wasn't it? And they're like, well, now we've been there. There's no point doing anything else.
If moon travel was affordable, would you guys go?
No. I'm too scared that I'd get like lost in space and just I don't like the thought of it at all.
It is weird.
I wouldn't go for free.
No, if someone offered me a chance to go for free, yeah, I'd say yes. I think just for that proof, was it fake or not? Do we have the potential?
Yeah, you could solve flat Earth as well.
Yeah, exactly. Or we're just going to get shipped off to a hangar in Nevada for a few days, wheeled back out, dropped in the ocean.
So yeah, without further ado, let's get into our conspiracies. So Calum, what have you got for us today?
Right, thanks for that, Luke. This theory entertains the idea that the moon landings were faked, filmed in a Hollywood studio by a team of NASA scientists and filmmakers.
This is one of the biggest, isn't it? One of the most mainstream theories.
So by now, as you said, everyone's aware of some of the main areas of contention from the official footage, despite NASA's sort of commitment to debunking any supposed inconsistencies. So have you got any ideas of what sort of things spring to mind?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not really massive into conspiracies, but I've definitely heard one about the flag blowing when there's no wind on the moon.
Yeah, I think that's the first one that everyone thinks of, saying that people thought, oh, this is evidence it's filmed in a desert because there's no wind or atmosphere in the moon. Or even it was in a studio environment and the cooling fans because the spacesuits got so hot under the bright studio lights. But NASA have always their official explanation, which is the motion of twisting the flag into the ground caused the sort of rippling effect. And it was fixed to a pole that ensured it would be taut and outstretched out, because a limp flag would not look very good on sort of your official photos of going to the moon.
Imagine that.
I think the other most famous one is the backdrop. The mountains and stuff always seem to stay in the same place from different perspectives, I think.
Yes, that is a good point, and that is something I think I will touch on a lot more slightly later on in the theory. But I think the main, I think, rebuttal of that one is to say the footage is just so vast, the moon, so things appear to be similar, just with how empty and open the background was. I think some rock formations and mountains appear slightly similar from different angles. I think that's the explanation they offer.
Okay. Isn't one of them there's no stars in the sky?
Yes, that's another one. So the stars argument is basically the moon landings took place during a lunar day, so the sun's showing, which basically, you think when we look out to the sky when the sun's out, we can't see any stars. It's just basically the sun outshines them all, makes it very hard to pick up with the naked eye or by light.
These are, I mean, especially the star one and the mountain one, these are things that you think if they were going to produce it in Hollywood, it's something they'd think of. I guess the flag one is something a bit more that, oh shit, we forgot. There's no wind on the moon, but the mountain one is something you'd think that one of the first things you'd think of when you're planning on filming it.
So one argument of conspiracy theories have presented why they didn't put stars on the backdrop if it was filmed in a studio was that die-hard conspiracists would actually plot the constellations.
Work out where they are, yeah.
Yeah, see if they're actually accurate from the place on the moon they're supposed to be.
That's a good point, to be fair.
So there's long links to go to, but there are people desperate to debunk these theories.
But equally, could they not just Photoshop in the stars in the right place? Because they know the coordinates of the moon and stuff.
I'm not sure how good say what the Photoshop capabilities were in those days, but I suppose they could project what you'd think, but there'll still be people looking with their telescopes and the sky maps, and you think from a certain angle something doesn't appear right, that's instant fuel for a conspiracy theorist to say, right, that doesn't look correct. And if that was to get out, a star constellation, it's not something you can say, oh, the star's moved, or something like that.
Yeah. Do you want me to fire any more at you?
Oh, the Van Allen belt.
That is a very common one, though. It's like a band of radiation, isn't it? And they say you couldn't get through it or something, and then the footage would be destroyed going through it and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to say the gamma and the beta radiation into two different belts, but this is a counter by saying the aluminium hull of the spacecraft would have insulated against it. And actually the guy who discovered it, Dr. James Van Allen, rebutted the claims that radiation was too harmful for the astronaut, saying that the average dose was less than 10 millisieverts, which is equivalent to the ambient radiation received by living at sea level for 3 years. So
I'm sure I've heard as well they weren't actually going through it very long, or something like they purposely went through the thinnest part of it.
They plotted a trajectory to take them through them to take the least amount of time to get through it. So for the more dangerous inner belt, they spent about 1.5 minutes to get through it, and it was an hour or so to get through the outer belt. So they took every measure to insulate against radiation best they could.
So despite this, they were exposed to as much radiation as you'd be exposed to on Earth in 3 years in just 1 minute.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's what they're saying, yeah.
That's
But it's non-lethal, and there's quite a lot of research about how much radiation is safe for humans working in different environments, which is out there. And it doesn't seem to go against any of the data that's out there.
I mean, I'm not a radiation expert, but I'm guessing you could probably argue an X-ray has, some kind of level of radiation that's way higher than humans normally encounter.
And so there's a reason why the doctors go behind the special screens.
Yeah, exactly. With an X-ray, you're there for 10 seconds or whatever, so you're all right. The other one I was going to raise, well, the average temperature of the moon's surface is over boiling point. It's like 106 degrees, and it varies from like minus 100 up to like 200 degrees on the moon. So it's like ridiculously hot. So the first point on that is basically that, we don't have suits now that you could go out in 200-degree heat. And then the kind of second part of it is they placed a photo. One of the astronauts placed a photo of himself on the moon's surface, like as a little memento. But if you put like a photo in your oven at 180 degrees, it would immediately like burn up and curl up.
I mean, this is something that I really should have known, but I never knew the moon was that hot. Does this not lead to even more questions about playing golf on the moon and stuff like that? And
well, yeah, exactly.
Even putting a flagpole on the moon at 100 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, I think this
calls
is the
a
main...
few things into question. Yeah,
the main argument was all the suits would have offered the initiation. They would have gone at certain times that would have ensured them the coolest temperatures. You're not really sure. That's the one that doesn't really get talked about enough, I think.
No, I think the only kind of explanation I've heard is that, without wanting to oversimplify it too much, is they went at night or something.
But then there would have been stars.
Oh yeah, fair point. Yeah, that's the only one I've heard. They went at a relatively cool time of day, but it kind of works both ways because it can swing from kind of minus 200 degrees right the way up to well past boiling point. So, I mean, neither one of those is ideal, really. And they both bring up their own questions. So, yeah, I think the temperature of the moon is maybe one that isn't talked about enough. You can carry on with your actual theory now.
That's just a little introduction. So from what Luke said in the detail in the space race brief, there's no denying that the US government and NASA had enough motivation to fake the footage. Now, when you take into account the discrepancies people have highlighted and maybe the risk of it being cooked alive when you set foot on the surface, and especially set across atop the backdrop of the Cold War and the nuclear tensions with Russia, especially, and rhetoric from President John F. Kennedy, who stated in 1961 that he had a goal of putting a man on the moon within a decade.
Yeah.
You can argue the stage was set for America to try and get one over their old adversaries.
I think that caught NASA by surprise, that statement. I think they were all a bit like, Christ, what's he saying that for? We're quite a long way off at this point. We're going to have to work overtime.
Yes, well, I think you can also argue that it's trying to deflect attention away from the Vietnam War as well, maybe just try and boost morale from a regime that was getting a lot of bad press for the disastrous campaign in the Viet Cong.
Can you imagine how mad it would have been watching? Because it was like live streamed, wasn't it? Imagine being in 1969 watching that on the TV, like going to the moon this first time ever. It would have been mental.
I was just watching the recent SpaceX launch. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I feel as well, potentially nothing in our lifetime will ever match people watching man landing on the moon.
No, even if we went to Mars, it's not as good. Because this was the first time ever going like out of Earth.
Yeah, so getting back to the theories now, I think alongside the black and white perspectives of either unequivocally going to the moon or faking the entire thing, so a third position has emerged. It's like the idea that NASA went to the moon but want to have some footage to ensure proof in the result of technical issues trying to transmit the footage from space.
Yeah, I mean, you can understand that. It's so unknown, isn't it? Going to the moon and filming it and live streaming it back to Earth back in the 60s. Like, imagine if you got there and were all ready to stream it back and it just didn't work. I mean, Skype doesn't work half the time today. So.
Yeah.
Or getting there and it's a disaster and you're watching people like burning up on live television. You don't want to run that risk,
well, yeah.
do you? So we also take into account the fact that over 100,000 people were involved in the Apollo space program throughout its duration. So imagine trying to keep 100,000 people silent.
Two things to say on those points. The first one, if he did actually go, still haven't made my mind up yet, either way. But if he did actually go, can you imagine kind of faking the footage kind of as a backup plan, but then using it, seeing people pick holes in it, throwing the whole thing into question? You'd be so frustrated because you'd want to say, like, oh, no, we actually did go. But we've just made this footage and it's not been made that well. And 50 years later, people are picking up on it. I just feel like you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't fake the footage knowing that it could have holes picked in it because it isn't real footage when you actually did go. That's maybe my first point on it. And then the keeping 100,000 people quiet one, I think, as much as that many people did work on it. They wouldn't all have to know. You could keep it within a small number of people and have the rest think they are actually controlling it or whatever, but they're actually just controlling simulations.
I suppose this is a risk of a friend telling a friend, or someone works in a different department, something slips out during like post-work beers or something, how...
Well, yeah, but I mean, we see whistleblowers all the time and they're just poo-pooed as being insane. So I think you could quickly hush it under the carpet.
And I mean, as well, the money that was involved in NASA and the space race in general, you could easily give them a hefty sum to keep their mouth shut.
Yeah,
money does talk. But so, and on your first point about sort of like the legitimacy of the footage, this is, I think, a perfect opportunity to introduce Stanley Kubrick, one of the most widely regarded film directors of our generation, just in film in general. Every single genre of film he goes into, he makes a masterpiece in, people say.
Don't think I've ever seen one of his films. I'll take your word for it.
It's Clockwork Orange by Kubrick.
Yeah, Clockwork Orange, The Shining, 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is the big, that and The Shining, the two I'm going to be referring to throughout this theory. Some very interesting stuff there. If you believe the theory that Kubrick was the one who was in charge of faking the footage, it came as a result of his 1963 film Dr. Strangelove. NASA was reportedly so enthralled by the special effects work, so he was highlighted as a perfect candidate to direct the moon landings. In return for directing the moon landing footage, Kubrick was to be given an almost unlimited budget to film his magnum opus, 2001: A Space Odyssey, released in 1968, and also to be free to make whatever film he wanted in the future without any intervention from governments or other bodies.
I think
Orange did get banned, didn't it?
I don't know.
It was very controversial.
I think it got banned in the UK for a good proportion of years. I could be totally wrong.
And America does have a funny relationship with sort of film censorship and what you can and can't show.
Yeah,
surely as soon as NASA approached him with this offer, he's immediately got all the power. Because even if he says, no, I don't want to do it, he knows NASA are planning on faking it. So it's such a risk to take from NASA.
Yeah, I think just the curiosity of working and then to have a load of not raw footage, but just work to then inform his film Space Odyssey.
I mean, I guess the explanation would be that exactly he did have all the bargaining power and he got exactly what he wanted and got a load of money as well on the back of it.
You suspect his hand was probably forced as well. Maybe they didn't exactly give him a choice.
Plus, they can always arrange an accident if things weren't to go the way they wanted. So if that looming over.
Yeah, apparently they asked Princess Diana to film.
That's why we haven't gone back to the moon. Rightly or wrongly, theorists have drawn parallels between the production of 2001: A Space Odyssey and the moon landings themselves, given that film production began in 1964 for 2001, up to its release in 1968, while the Apollo program began in 1963 and the first moon landing was in July 1969. Also, it's well documented that Kubrick spent a lot of time working with NASA to inform the scientific elements of his film to ensure sort of accuracy.
I have thought of another thing, actually, somewhat unrelated, but 2001: A Space Odyssey came out in 1968.
Yeah.
And you'll probably get to this, but doesn't it kind of share like a landscape with the moon footage or something like that? Like they think the same sets were used.
It's not directly the same sets, but some of the same techniques I'm just about to get into, so that's a good point.
Well, kind of on that point, with NASA forcing his hand, it would make logical sense to me that you would do the moon landing first and then you'd release the film. Because if you do it the other way around, you can have people go, well, the film looks just like the moon footage. But say the moon footage was first, you could just say, well, I used some of the actual footage from the moon landing in my film. Right.
Well, there's an argument to sort of counteract that point as well, which I'll get into slightly later in the order. But it covers quite a lot of angles, very in-depth. One thing that Kubrick reportedly struggled with was being able to make the shots on the moon's surface appear believable. There was always to depict like the vastness and the emptiness of it within the confines of it. Either trying to shoot on location, which is how do you find a location that replicates the moon's surface, which we don't actually know what it 100% is. I suppose at that time.
Do you mean when he's filming the supposed moon landings or filming the actual film?
This is the moon landings.
Okay, fine.
So the technique that Kubrick eventually was believed to have settled on was called front screen projection, a technique that allows pre-filmed scenery to be projected over the actors onto a highly reflective background screen. It uses carefully positioned cameras, which projects through the actors onto a really reflective background screen, gives them the illusion of a much wider background.
I guess it's like exactly the same way a green screen works, right?
It's basically the precursor to the green screen, but the actual green screen is all done on computer. Or it can be projected on, that's all done in post with the green screen. So maybe with the green screen, you've got like two layers, and with the green screen, you paint away that to reveal the background, whereas this is projected directly onto the soundstage.
So they just reflect a massive beam out of a projector.
Yeah, so basically it's a pre-filmed image or a still or something just to show a wide, vast background that can basically, with a trick of perspective, create almost like an endless horizon sort of thing.
Okay.
Basically, they struggled to depict the vastness of the moon's background until they found this front screen projection.
It wouldn't have to be that vast, would it? It's smaller than Earth, and you can film stuff on as if you're on
Just
Earth.
empty though, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
but you could just make it black. The sky could just be black. The moon could just be.
But then I think that would be a bit of a giveaway. It's only just if it's just a screen, you've got a big black background. It'll be a very, very hard cut from the actual studio floor onto the background.
Well, you can see that line, isn't there? There's a line when you use this effect between the practical effect in the foreground and then that
exactly
effect in the background. There's like a very visible line. If it's done well, you can't really see it, but you can normally pick it out.
It's a lot harder to pick up, but theorists have basically identified these sort of lines that depict the breaking point from the horizon to the supposed background. So as the shots that show clearly defined textures on the ground in terms of the granularity of the rocks, pebbles and dust, which disappear completely beyond a certain point, which is then believed to be defined as the end of the soundstage, the start of this screen, which has been sort of attributed to a slight difference between materials used on the so-called soundstage and the projected image for the background. Because as the mission sort of progressed, Kubrick perfected this technique, making it slightly harder to differentiate between the foreground and background. But it's still quite easy to notice, especially when you consider that there's, say, props and setting parts that obscure the actual bottom of the screen. So you'll never see, I guess, sort of a 90-degree right angle between moon surface and sky. There'll be a series of rocks trying to disguise it, make it a bit more gradual. But these differences in texture are what give it away. And if you manipulate things like the contrast and the gamma effect on photos using editing software, it can highlight this line, as John mentioned, slightly more.
Yeah, make it stand out a bit more, I guess. When you're talking about the rocks, that has reminded me of another one of the main problems people have, one of the quite famous conspiracy things, and it's like one of the rocks in one of the photos looks like it's been marked with a marker pen. There's writing on it. I can't remember what the writing says. I think people speculated that could have been like a prop.
Yeah, I've heard that one as well. I think the thing is it's just a natural marking or something. I haven't really got much else to say on that. What can you say apart from just on patty conspiracy theorists? It's just that sometimes rocks have black markings, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes, so American author and conspiracy theorist Richard Hoagland has been committed to manipulating the photographic parameters I mentioned earlier, such as the gamma and contrast on these moon landing footage, in order to highlight supposed imperfections in geometries in the pitch black sky, which could be attributed to tiny glass beads used to make the highly reflective Scotch light screen required for front screen projection. However, Richard's argument is that these strange geometries and structures are evidence that NASA is trying to hide evidence of alien technology and giant glass cities that are on the moon's surface. What's less contentious is the fact it's well documented that Kubrick had to stitch a multiple of these light screens together to make a backdrop big enough for the scenes he wants to film for 2001: A Space Odyssey. So this may be what Hoagland is seeing from his analysis, but he's just calling it a glass cities and alien technology.
Yeah, I think that's possible.
Theorists have also experimented with playing the moon landing footage at different speeds.
Oh, I forgot about that, yeah.
Yeah, so speeding up the footage appears to give the impression of normal human movement compared to the slower bounding, which has been attributed to the lower gravity and lack of atmosphere on the moon. Some have speculated that the lower gravity would cause people to move faster, given the lowered resistance, but this has been explained by the bulky spacesuits that made movement difficult, and also taking extra care not to move too quickly, should they fall and damage their equipment, which in the vacuum of space could prove fatal.
If you think about yourself, I've only just thought of this, so I don't know how apt the comparison is, but I suppose if you think about yourself in water, you'd float as if there was less gravity, but if you try and walk through it, you're kind of wading. I don't know if it's kind of similar-ish thing, because there's, I don't know, it looks as if they're more wading, doesn't it? It looks like more of an effort.
Yeah, the water argument has been brought up as well. Just as a similar phenomenon. The increased speed of movement is evidenced, though, by dust clouds kicked up by the astronauts, which fall to the ground much faster than they would on Earth due to decreased atmosphere. But this slow-motion theory has been linked to Kubrick's work on 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was released the year before the moon landing. This theory implies that the space scenes in 2001: A Space Odyssey were filmed in slow motion to acclimatize audiences to the slow motion environment portrayed by the Apollo landings. That's the sort of rebuttal to the point you raised earlier, John. This was like 2001: Space Odyssey was like a primer for audiences to get them used to what being in space should look like, according to Kubrick.
Yeah, I can kind of see that point. But I mean, I suppose you could say, well, what would he know?
Well, I think it was documented he was working very closely with NASA and top scientists, and it's another point on that slightly later, which is interesting. But just back to the practicalities of filming in slow motion, which is another debunking argument against the fact that the moon landing footage was faked. So when you're considering this was filmed in the 1960s and it was filmed on reels of film, a typical reel of 35mm film at 24 frames per second lasts 11 minutes and is 1,000 feet long. If we apply this to 12 frames per second, which is close to the 10 frames that NASA said they recorded at on the moon, running for 143 minutes, which is how long the Apollo 11 footage lasts, you would need 6.5 reels of footage, which is, say, 6,500 feet of film, which would all need to be stitched together, spliced, transferring negatives, the printing, which could lead to potential specks of dust, hair, and just general with a little bit of wear and tear, which would instantly give the game away. There's none of these artifacts present, which means
as well fitting them in the ship alone, because it takes so much energy. Like, it had to cut so much weight in terms of keeping it kind of as light as possible, because you need so much fuel to lift even a kilogram out of the atmosphere. I mean, I don't know how big a roll 6,500 feet is when rolled up, but it sounds like it would be quite a lot.
Because isn't like small intestines or something crazy, like however many feet, and they're wrapped up inside your stomach. So yeah, it could just be a matter of it's so thin that when it's rolled up, it's not.
But still, if you think of a big film camera back then, they are very bulky. Shooting, there was big round reels of film on there that's being fed in. So just like I say, maybe unnecessary weight. And also, subsequent Apollo landings were shot at 30 frames per second. So faking those would have been 3 times harder. As I say, 3 times as much film would have been required to slow the footage down the requisite amounts.
Yeah.
I mean, 6,500 feet. It's like 1.25 miles, isn't it? I mean, it's a long way.
I think film is similar width to paper, I guess, but rolls and rolls and rolls of it will all add up.
Yeah, exactly.
So, in an interesting development to this angle, conspiracy theorists have suggested that Kubrick's 1980 film, The Shining, served as a director's confession to his involvement with NASA. Widely regarded as his most personal and most misunderstood work, owing to the sweeping changes he made to various aspects of Stephen King's source material. The series starts off with the Overlook Hotel, which is the main setting for the film. It is believed to represent America, being shiny and new, but built with dark secrets contained within. Jack Nicholson's character, Jack, is thought to be a depiction of Kubrick himself, and in the film, he is entrusted with the hotel by the manager, who has an uncanny resemblance to John F. Kennedy, and the actor, in fact, wore a toupee to maybe achieve this effect. The scene in which the keys are given to Kubrick features a model of an eagle in the background. The eagle is thought to be a direct representation of NASA, while also being the name of the landing craft used to reach the moon's surface, given the famous quote, "The eagle has landed."
Yeah.
So during the first act of the film, a cold winter storm has gripped the hotel, which alludes to the Cold War and rivalry with Russia, one of the driving reasons for faking the landings. Imagery of bears are used throughout the film to symbolize the Soviet threat. In the most important scene of the film, the audience discovers the nature of the deal that Jack, or Stanley, has cut with the manager, or NASA. So Jack's son Danny, also believed to be a representation of Stanley Kubrick's more inquisitive side, a childlike innocence almost, is playing with toy trucks on the carpet as a pattern very reminiscent of the shape of Launch Pad 39 at Cape Canaveral, from which the Apollo rockets were launched. From nowhere, a ball rolls towards Danny, symbolizing the plan for the moon landings. Upon seeing the ball, Danny stands up to reveal that he's wearing a sweatshirt with a graphic of the Apollo 11 rocket stitched onto it. Danny notices that room 237, one he's been warned to stay away from, is open. In the novel, room 237 was originally room 217, which theorists believe Kubrick changed in order to represent the distance from the Earth to the Moon, which is approximately 233,000 miles. Room 237 is very important to the film because in the context of the deal Jack made with the manager, room 237 represents the fake moon landing, because in the movie, nothing in the room is actually real, despite appearing to be so.
That is odd, changing the room number. Just because it's such a small detail, you just feel like, well, there's no need to change it. Even if you take it as, if you take all the moon stuff out of it, what's he gained out of changing it from 217 to 237?
Exactly.
So you just wouldn't bother. It wouldn't even cross your mind.
So there's that, and there's other changes reported to have annoyed Stephen King, so he doesn't consider this Kubrick adaptation to be the most faithful rendition of his novel.
So there were lots of other changes as well then.
A few scenes, there's daughters of the old manager, which appear as apparitions. They're in the film, in the book, they were just sisters, but Stanley changed them to be twins. which I think, I can't remember exactly what it's supposed to represent, but it's something to do with like, the old moon plans, or plans leading up to it beforehand, to Gemini, which was a project before Apollo. I think Gemini represents twins.
Okay.
So something along those lines.
It's two-faced, isn't it? The Gemini symbol.
Exactly.
Like two faces. Could be two faces of the moon.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a way, no matter what got changed, someone would somehow link it to the moon.
It does harken back to your old English lessons, thinking of, the curtains are blue, what does this symbolise? You can stretch and play with this imagery, manipulate it to suit your narrative. As long as you...
Some of them are definitely a bit damning, like bears representing the Soviet Union, and I mean the room number change for sure is pretty damning, but some of them are definitely clutching a little bit at straws, but when the straws to be clutched at, why not clutch at them?
Exactly.
Why would you not make it like, because it's a bit of a tenuous link, the 237, because it's 237,000 miles away or something. Would you not change it to like 11, like for Apollo 11 or something like that? Something a bit more on the nose, a bit more obvious. I
do feel like I say this a lot, especially during this theory, but hold that thought on the 11.
Oh, okay.
So back to the film. It's also a very rough synopsis trying to go through the key scenes.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, I've never actually watched this film in full. I've just watched it through the context of a conspiracy theory.
I do want to watch it now. It is making me want to watch it.
I mean, I don't do well with horror films at the best of times. I had to watch as much of it as I could.
Yeah, to be fair, I must say, I've seen a few of Kubrick's things. I've seen Clockwork Orange and I've seen The Moon Landings, and they were both pretty good, so I wouldn't complain.
After a scene where Jack has a dream about killing Danny, supposed to represent his more innocent side, Jack goes to a bar in the Gold Room where the real manager of the hotel is revealed, implying that Jack has sold his soul in making this deal, which is Kubrick agreeing to fake the moon landing. He's given the sort of satanic imagery subtly used within the manager's introduction. Jack is then able to see the spirits that reside within the Overlook Hotel, symbolising Kubrick's admission to the inner circle, to be in with NASA and those other powers that be, if you believe that sort of angle.
Did you say he was in a bar?
Yes.
But you're going to see spirits there anyway, then?
Yeah, very good. And there's also the drink he gets poured as well as some symbolism there. I think he has a quote or something, I would die for a drink or something. I'd sell my soul for a drink, with the quote. So that's maybe a little bit more on the nose if he's signed away his creative licensing or whatever to basically work with NASA despite his best intentions.
Was the exact quote, I think it was something along the lines of, I'd sell my soul for a bit of that Moon Landings IPA.
Blue Moon IPA. Right, so in another key scene, Wendy, Jack's wife, a possible representation of Kubrick's real wife, Christiane, finds Jack's typewriter and pages that just consist of endless variations of the phrase, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Now, the word all could be interpreted as A11 or Apollo 11.
You do well to go a whole film about using the words all.
Yeah.
It's a fairly innocuous phrase, but in the context of the film, it's rather spooky, given that it just reams and reams of that with various little typos and different formatting, but it's just all he's been working at. He's been telling his wife to leave him in peace while he's writing his book. She makes the discovery that all he's been writing is all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. The resulting confrontation between Jack and Wendy that arises from this finding is thought to symbolise the magnitude of the agreement Kubrick made with the US government and obligations he cannot back down. In the film, this sparks an impassioned monologue from Jack, reciting the burden of his responsibility and the contract that he is signed to oversee the hotel, while he gets angrier and angrier. Another change that Kubrick made from the original novel may seem innocuous to the untrained eye, was changing the colour of Jack's car from red to yellow. During one of the later scenes, a red car in the same model is shown to have been wrecked in a crash, which is thought to have been a direct message from Kubrick to Stephen King that Stanley has hijacked his original vision to suit his own needs.
That's pretty savage.
Yeah, we said earlier, Stephen King wasn't exactly happy with this adaptation, despite being a widely acclaimed film. There's all these key scenes, boy riding his tricycle around the hotel, two girls, basically the Here's Johnny act scene, which doesn't actually get mentioned in this conspiracy theory.
Sure, you could find a way to link that scene back to the moon landings if you wanted to stretch it.
Cutting up this or destroying the soundstage in a fit of rage or something like that. So one final point is that throughout Jack's descent to madness, his appearance becomes more and more unkempt, which is thought to mirror Kubrick's change in appearance from being youthful and well-groomed at the start of production, 2001: A Space Odyssey, to growing a scruffy beard and letting his hair go, and pictures of him at the end of the production. Actor Jack Nicholson and Kubrick also had a similar hairstyle at the start of the film. So what do you guys think then? Is this just a wealth of coincidences and some clever analysis, or was Kubrick trying to say that there's something deeper going on?
Well, there's so much to go through with that one. It's quite compelling, like you say. The fact that, maybe he was leaving little Easter eggs for people to find. You feel like NASA would clamp down on that, despite saying, that he might have bargained for complete creative control on every project in the future. But I think part of the deal would surely be, well, please don't allude to it and give the game away. But I suppose they are obscure enough that you can look at it both ways and say, they're intentionally hidden.
Yeah.
Not exactly in plain sight, but then you can look at it the other way and say, well, kind of confirmation bias, you're looking for things, so you're finding them. And there's actually nothing really hidden there at all.
I think the fact that the child, Danny, was wearing a jumper with Apollo 11 rockets on.
Yeah, that's certainly the most in-your-face one.
When he goes into the room 237, which is basically not what as it seems, and symbolising the fakeness of the moon landing.
Oh yeah, true. That is quite a in-your-face one. Certainly that some of the footage could be fake. I think there's quite a lot of people believe that, and probably with good reason. Especially like some of the details we mentioned earlier on about kind of the landscape, and it does look very similar to the film. So as if it was created in the same style. And also there's a few things like there's a picture of a footprint on the moon that I know a lot of people talk about, because it's like very clearly defined as if you trod in like the wet sand near the sea. Whereas if you did it like higher up, it'd just be like a shoe mark, but none of the details. Whereas on the moon landings, it's all the details, which implies there's like moisture in the surface of the moon, which obviously has never been revealed. There's never been said that there's water on the moon, because that could host life. So it'd be huge news.
Exactly, yeah, that's one of the big ones that people don't. So I'm not sure the official explanation for that one either.
No, I'm not. I mean, you'd expect there is one, but yeah, I'm not aware of it. So yeah, I think overall, I suppose there's certainly little clues. There's lots of anomalies in the footage that we've seen, and kind of reasons why perhaps it wasn't the most practical to film stuff up there and bring it back. So yeah, I think I'm very much on the fence kind of as a whole, but if I were to lean towards there was someone up with it, I'd definitely go along with a theory like this, that a lot of the footage was faked. And who better to do it? Someone who's planning to do a space film and was already maybe in touch with NASA and was one of the biggest directors at the time, especially with all the funding. So as a conspiracy as a whole, I mean, it's one of the biggest conspiracies of all time. It's the global impact, if this ever came out, would be enormous. So conspiracy as a whole, I'm going to go for a 9.
Ooh, yeah, I'd say that.
And then believability, I'm going to go for a 6.5.
Is that I'm going with the angle that we went to the moon, but sort of some of the footage some of it was produced in a Hollywood studio.
Yeah.
There's sort of particular argument that some people I think that if Kubrick was so committed to his vision, he would have rather gone to the moon to shoot than make it just for that ultimate realism.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
He says to NASA, right, we can fake the moon landers and you can not go to the moon, but I want an unlimited budget for my next film that will involve me having to be funded to go to the moon.
Imagine if that was the case in 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was shot on location.
That was shot on the moon, but the landings were fake.
Should have put that in conspiracy later on.
You might have ruined my game. Huh?
Oh.
It wasn't in there, sadly.
Yes, what do you think then, Luke, overall?
I mean, one thing I will say is, put the believability aside, this is one of the cleverest kind of conspiracies I've ever heard. Ignore the fact, like, the obvious, not the obvious, but the well-known part of it. It was filmed on set, but just linking it back to The Shining, it really gives it an extra angle. And I mean, it's smart, the things that people have plucked out The Shining and the mission. So I really like it in that sense. And because of how big it is as well, I'm actually going to give it a 9.5 out of 10.
Ooh. On the highest rated one, it was one of the biggest conspiracy theories we ever had, or we ever featured on this podcast. So, yeah, high praise indeed.
In terms of believability, a little bit low for the whole idea that Kubrick directed it and alluded to it in his later film, The Shining. And also, it just seems ridiculous, as John mentioned earlier on, that he'd released 2001: A Space Odyssey before and used the same techniques. You think all logic would dictate that that's probably the most stupid thing you could do in the situation. In terms of it being filmed, I would not be surprised if, like you mentioned, Calum, one of the angles is that they did it just in case there was any technical issues. Because, I mean, you can imagine that's a huge possibility, and it would ruin absolutely everything. All the hard work you put into it could just be ruined by a camera going wrong. So yeah, I find that a little bit believable. So overall, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10 for that.
That's fair. Yeah, so I think that is one of the cruxes. You think, just in case as a backup, we'll have this filmed in the studio, just so we've got something to show. So, I mean, at the time, I don't think too many people were questioning it, but as the years went on, I think that's when more conspiracy theories start to come out of the woodworks. But yeah, I think for my ratings, I think I'm going to actually go one further. Let's give I think it might be the first ever 10 we've had. Well, I was so enthralled by this. I took so many notes during the documentaries I was watching, especially on The Shining. I think that's the one that just tipped it from a high 9 to the 10s. I think it was fascinating, sort of seeing this film through a whole different lens.
I'd never heard any of the Shining links either.
Just the amount of symbolism that may or may not be going on there is either incredible, say, detective work from these conspiracy theorists, or someone has reached so far but done it so convincingly you've got to just applaud. Almost like too many coincidences for them all not to be a little hint here and there. Given how he's manipulated the original source material to suit his needs almost. As for believability, we'll never know really. It's the one, like say, basically every conspiracy theory, you never know the full story. You only speculate. But using logic, trying to apply logic and reason, it would make sense to have had some footage going on, especially given the apparent discrepancies you can highlight, different little flaws here and there with the technology at the time, like this, the projection of the backgrounds being able to be identified under certain photographic conditions, so like the breakpoints between the horizon and the back screen and difference in texture. But I do still believe that we did go to the moon, but I do quite like the theory that footage released to the public just as extra propaganda, just to show how good it was almost. So for that reason, I'm going to go for a 6 out of 10 on the believability front. Right now, so I'll pass it back over to our host Luke for the next theory of the podcast.
Thanks for that, Calum. That's certainly one of the best conspiracies we've ever had here on this podcast. There's just going to be better ones to come as we keep going on and become more used to presenting. But yeah, for my theory, I'm going to be looking into the theory that the moon landings did happen, but weren't quite as successful as we're told. This is that the moon is holding many dark secrets, even as many as Jeffrey Epstein himself. There are many sides to this conspiracy, and I haven't been able to cover them all, but I will touch on a few I found particularly interesting. And so, despite myself not really being an avid believer in conspiracies, two things always struck me as odd about the moon missions, and we kind of touched on both of them already. But number one is, why have only the United States been to the moon? And number two, why have we not been back since 1972, which is 48 years ago? I mean, we touched a bit on the financial side, and I'm going to quickly go into a little bit more detail. So the average cost of a moon mission was about £18 billion, which when adjusted for inflation actually equates to about £200 billion in today's money.
Yeah, so I don't think any governments could really justify, just to say they can go back to the moon.
I mean, yeah, just looking at the sheer number, it's kind of clear why no country has really challenged the US, and also why themselves they haven't gone back. It's just impossible to justify spending so much.
I was just going to say, over time though, as the technology got better, you would expect the cost to come down.
I agree with that totally. I do think over time the cost would have greatly reduced, but still be a hefty proportion of government money that can arguably be spent on better things.
Yeah, 100%.
Exactly.
If the government makes a post about potentially going to space, that'll be just flooding the comments section.
It definitely would.
Let's just take an example where costs stay the same, which is £200 billion in today's money. Even the third biggest economy in the world, which is Japan, would be around 5% of their entire GDP. So you can just see the amount that this really truly costs. As John mentioned, though, the costs of technology have kind of advanced so greatly that you would expect it to be cheaper. And I mean, as well as that, it would be a huge achievement for any country. Something that I find a little bit interesting is that there was a Dutch business set up called Project Mars. And I'm sure you guys have all heard about this. It originally planned to start a human colony on Mars by 2025, and they had actually selected people to go on this Mars mission. So, I mean, if travel to Mars was seen viable in 2025, then this Dutch company clearly felt like they had enough investment that they could potentially fund this trip. So,
isn't SpaceX doing one? Because it's still going ahead, this people on Mars. I think it's been pushed back quite a while, but I think it's still going ahead. Like they have selected all the people and stuff.
Yeah, I think this Dutch one was the original idea, but that is now as well SpaceX. Quick disclaimer I should probably give for this is that this Dutch business is now bankrupt, so maybe it wasn't as viable as I'm trying to make out. The financial reasons for not going to the moon are a bit boring, and some of the other conspiracies as to why we haven't gone back are definitely much more interesting. So to start, all manned missions went to the near side of the moon, and that's the side we can see. So the moon's orbit period is the exact same as its axis spin period. And what this means is that we will only ever see one side of the moon.
I think it's called a tidal lock.
Yeah,
so it's basically one face is locked.
So although the entire moon has obviously been pictured by satellites, very surprisingly, it took until 2019 for a rover to land on the far side of the moon for the first ever time to explore more in depth. And I mean, that kind of blew my mind. I think that we'd have sent rovers a long time ago.
Did the rover make it back?
Yeah, the rover did make it back. This is whether you want to believe it or not. Guess where that rover came from?
Where?
that rover came from China. And I mean, as a conspiracy podcast, I mean, we have to be skeptical of anything China feeds back to.
Yeah, so one of our unrunning themes, if you listen to several of our episodes.
The thing that probably seems the most odd to me about this is, given technology is at such a stage that we can send satellites out of the galaxy and past Pluto and send rovers to analyze Mars, why did we never think of testing the surface of the far side of the moon? I guess you could argue that it's the moon, it's going to be the same all around, but given the different climates of the two sides of the moon, you would expect to see big differences on each side.
It's still just mind-blowing that we've been able to send probes out of the galaxy and past Pluto, as you said. It's
crazy that it can get back as well, to send a signal that far back. So what could be lurking on the far side of the moon? Some accounts from a former military intelligence official has claimed that there's more on the dark side of the moon than NASA is letting on. So Carl Wolf, who's a technician at the Air Force Tactical Air Command, he analysed data from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, and he claimed he and his colleagues viewed artificial structures on the dark side of the moon, including both radio antennas and structures made by intelligent beings. Now, many conspiracists back up this theory, just searching photos that have been released by NASA themselves. And there are also claims to suggest that these structures are millions of years old and made by ancient civilization. So I guess this could lead to us believing that there could be some kind of ancient moon race, or even Earth life millions of years ago that also managed space travel and set up colonies on the moon.
I know there's supposedly pyramids on the moon, and I've heard that, which is pretty weird.
But it's just a problem when you mention, say, life on the moon. It seems just so bizarre and so out there. Your instruments are laughed out of the room, no matter how much scientific data you may have to back these claims up.
Yeah.
It seems like it's utterly preposterous to a normal, everyday person. Because that's what we've been told for 50 years or something. There's no life out there.
It does seem totally crazy, and personally, I would never really believe it as such, but we definitely haven't explored the whole surface of the moon. And
one thing on that, because I suppose the theory is that they've discovered kind of settlements and may or may not have discovered life on the moon, but are keeping it quiet. It reminds me of like a Mitchell and Webb sketch where they kind of talk about the logic behind keeping that quiet and kind of joke about the fact that if NASA were to find life on the moon, no one's going to blame NASA and kind of have a go at them for finding it. You'd want to get that knowledge out there maybe and have like countries working together and work out if there is any imminent threat or whatever.
And plus we have sent out probes specifically for the purpose of trying to make contact with extraterrestrial life. So do you wonder if there was intelligent life on the moon? I can't believe I'm saying this. They would have maybe tried to get in contact with that satellite or something. Or they didn't think it sent it to that direct area, sort of the more far-flung areas of the galaxy. But there's definitely been attempts to contact what's out there in the deep space.
Oh yeah, they have. They sent out like mathematical equations and stuff. I'm not really sure the point of that, but they literally were saying that they were seeing if anybody would respond back with the answer.
I guess it's some NASA guy struggling with his kids' maths homework, trying to see if the aliens can help him.
They also sent out like video recordings, and they chose different musicians and different music around the world. They also decided to send out hello in like 120 different languages, just in case any other planet out there just happens to speak exactly the same language.
Yeah, I know. I can kind of understand the logic behind maybe said, because they sent out like some stuff like E equals MC squared and stuff, kind of laws that would be constant wherever you are. So I can understand the logic in that, but like as if any aliens are going to be speaking like Portuguese or something. It's just
one abducted Maddie mind.
You never know. There might be some unintelligent Portuguese life forms out there in the world that are just waiting to discover E equals MC squared and build a civilization. Yeah, so one thing that this conspiracy does seem content on is that it's only the far side of the moon that could be hiding something. I guess this could seem odd, but you could argue there could be a number of reasons for this, and that would be that life would be unable to survive as the climatic and light differences on each side of the moon vary greatly. But there are, of course, conspiracies surrounding the near side of the moon too, and also this kind of revolves around what was actually seen on the moon missions themselves. Most intriguing about this is that there were actually 2 minutes of video and radio silence when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin left the lunar module. Unless you believe it was directed in a studio by Stanley Kubrick, the cameras and recording that failed were some of the most expensive and highly advanced equipment, which produced reliable recordings throughout the rest of the mission. It seems very coincidental that they would kind of cut out when Armstrong and Aldrin left the lunar module.
When did they cut out? Just as they took their first few steps?
Just when they were leaving the lunar module.
Before one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I believe so, yeah.
Don't know whether all the listeners know this, but that line was actually missaid. It was supposed to be one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind, because man and mankind are synonymous. So it doesn't make sense the way he said it.
It's interesting. I've never thought of it like that. Actually.
Kubrick was raging in the cutting room.
Yeah. Stick to the fucking script.
And so these 2 minutes of cutting out were also censored to people on Earth watching back in their homes. And now, personally, I wouldn't be surprised if either they delayed the footage to the public in case something went wrong, which kind of vibes back with Calum's theory that in case of technical issues, there was a backup, or B, there was a delay in the footage coming back to Earth anyway, because of the distance of the moon, and this gave them some time to censor anything that went wrong anyway. And so, because of this kind of break, conspiracists often believe that Armstrong and Aldrin saw something when they were on the moon. And there's a supposed discussion between Armstrong and a university professor that I'm going to read out the transcript now.
If I was one of them and I just landed on the moon and I saw an alien run past, my first reaction would be, shit, I'd run straight back on. I wouldn't be like, right, turn this camera off.
It's the language is colourful, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, no matter what happened, if the camera cut out at any point filming, given, I think Calum said it was, 143 minutes worth of filming, there was always going to be conspiracies, and I guess it probably was quite likely that at some point it could quite easily cut out.
Did you say for 2 minutes? Because that's a long time to be black.
For 2 minutes.
So 2 minutes where all hell broke loose.
Yeah, they managed to kill off all the aliens on the moon in them 2 minutes.
They had special ray guns with them just in case.
Oh, did they actually take any weapons up with them? Just...
Why do you think they took the golf club?
They're
just pinging balls at the aliens.
They had 6,000 foot of reel to strangle any aliens with.
Like lassoing them with it.
Well, there must be a primitive race of aliens then.
That's what 2001 Space Odyssey should have looked like. So it's worth noting that this discussion is a supposed discussion with an unnamed university professor, but I'll read it out anyway. So the professor asked Armstrong what really happened out there with Apollo 11, to which Armstrong replied, "It was incredible, of course. We had always known there was a possibility. The fact is, we were warned off. There was never any questions then of a space station or a moon city." And then the professor asked, what does he mean by warned off? And Armstrong said, "I can't go into details, except to say that their ships were far superior to ours, both in size and technology. Boy, were they big and menacing. No, there is no question of a space station." It seems a bit ironic that he says he can't go into details and then lists all the details. And Professor then said, "But NASA had other missions after Apollo 11, to which Armstrong replied, naturally, NASA was committed at that time and couldn't risk a panic on Earth, but it really was a quick scoop and back again." And I mean, this conversation, it's almost definitely made up. It's very far-fetched that Armstrong would blurt all this out and speak in this manner. But it certainly gives some food for thought. And if this were to be true that Armstrong and Aldrin did see something on the moon, why other Apollo missions would go back anyway? Because they already planned, and NASA didn't want to frighten anyone back on Earth.
I have heard, not that conversation, but I have heard kind of conspiracies before that seem to say that Neil Armstrong was kind of racked with guilt and it didn't sit well with him, the fact that they'd supposedly faked this. And he's very sheepish in interviews about it. And apparently he did tell a few people, obviously, this could all be made up, but he apparently did kind of tell the truth to a few people. And like I say, it didn't sit well with him. And you can see in interviews, he is always very uncomfortable talking about it. Whereas Buzz Aldrin's a bit more...
He's a bit more brass, he'll say that.
Yeah, he doesn't really care. He punches reporters in the face when they question him. There's that famous footage of him being shown footage from his Apollo 11 mission. There's like a bit where they're like messing around with the window, so it looks like they're a lot further away from Earth than they actually are. And the first thing he said is to the people who were like secretly filming, he's like, "Where did you find this? Who's giving you this footage?" And then he just kind of flipped out, stormed out the room, and ended up punching the guy in the face. So it was a really odd reaction from him. And it's all like, you can see the interview. Like,
given how much publicity that the men who have gone to the moon have had, it's going to be very, very difficult to stick to an official script if something was to have gone down and you were signing all your secrets acts. And you're doing just that many hours of press tours.
Like there was like a huge press conference when they first got back, hosted by NASA. And like one of the questions is like, "Oh, what was the ground like underneath your feet? Like, how did that feel?" And they're all just looking at each other, and then it's silent for ages, and Buzz or someone, can't remember who, but just goes, "Oh yeah, I'm not really sure. Didn't really notice that." And they move on. It's like, surely you can give an answer to that. That's not a difficult question at all.
It was dusty, but we were able to leave footprints. I think Kubrick might have watered the ground a bit.
Yeah.
Also, not only that, apparently the original moon landing recordings were erased by NASA, accidentally erased, so that's certainly interesting.
I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, they've lost a lot of the stuff for those initial landings to the extent that scientists today wouldn't be able to go to the moon using the same technology that they did back then because they don't know how. They don't know exactly how they did it because a lot of it was destroyed. So they can go in the new ways.
Yeah.
Or supposedly can go the new ways, but they physically don't know how to go.
That's oddly convenient if you are a conspiracy theorist.
I know, it's really odd.
Yeah, and sorry, so just going back to the previous theory that the recording cut out, I should add that it was the audio that cut out, not the video. However, one thing is that obviously the audio transmission could be picked up by other people, just like, keen guy, like picking up different radio frequencies, would be able to pick up some kind of transmission potentially, and within 30 minutes of
Sorry, I've just pictured some kids playing with walkie-talkie, trying to talk to each other at the opposite end of the garden. One of them picks up the moon.
But yeah, so it is worth noting, after 30 minutes of landing on the moon, there were already rumours circulating that they'd come across an alien in a crater. And I mean, I guess you could argue that would always come out. No, if you were landing on the moon, someone was always going to say there were aliens there, but supposedly someone had managed to tune into the radio frequency that got cut out during that 2 minutes and heard Armstrong announcing this alien.
I think that is probably the scariest thing I could ever think of. The fact that they're the first people ever to go to the moon, they touch down after already probably a treacherous, terrifying journey, and then you just see a massive spaceship already on the moon. You'd have a heart attack on the spot.
What would you do in that situation? How can you convey we come in peace or something like that?
The thing is, like, you could just argue, like, what happened if someone just landed on your street right now that was an alien? First of all, they'd be shitting yourselves, but what would you do in that moment?
Yeah, true.
I generally don't know. You could do nothing almost. You'd just be shocked into that complete inaction.
I've never thought of that angle, that the aliens were more scared of them when they touched down. I suppose you could never communicate with them, though, because, I mean, if you think of it, say you land on the moon and there's a lion there or something, you could never learn to communicate with that.
Yeah.
Everyone always assumes they're more intelligent than us, but the likelihood is they probably aren't, if there are any aliens out there.
It's like even hand gestures, facial expressions would all be different. It's like, for example, if you go to Bulgaria, nodding your head and shaking your head is the way around. So
yeah, exactly. And there's an old kind of saying, it was actually mentioned in an old Ricky Gervais podcast, but it was basically that if a lion could speak English, you still wouldn't be able to understand it, because like your points of reference in your daily life would be so far removed from each other that you would never have anything in common. You couldn't talk about anything. So if you take that to an alien, even if by some miracle you could find a way to communicate, you wouldn't really be able to communicate because you wouldn't understand any of their references. They wouldn't understand any of yours.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there are other conspiracies that there were supposed powerful beings on the moon, and the last one that I'm going to touch on, and the one that probably blew my mind the most because it's actually not a conspiracy but true, and that is that both the United States and Soviet Union had plans to detonate nuclear weapons on the moon. I don't know if you guys have heard of this before.
No.
All I've heard is that they planned to use like nuclear bombs on the moon, and I don't know anything else about it.
One thing I heard was in the lead up to the Apollo missions, they detonated a nuclear weapon in the atmosphere to try and disrupt the Van Allen belt.
I think in the 70s and maybe the 60s as well, some of the tests like governments did were shocking, almost actively trying to destroy the ozone layer with some of the nuclear bombs they were setting off, just like deserts and aiming them in the sky and stuff. So yeah, this doesn't surprise me that much.
So I'll touch a bit on the actual motives of why America and the Soviet Union want to detonate nukes on the moon, but obviously it ties into a conspiracy that there could be kind of some powerful being on the other side of the moon or on the near side of the moon that they'd want to eradicate by using nuclear weapons. And so the Soviet plan wasn't actually proven until 2010, but the US project A119, which is also known as a study of lunar research flights, was a plan developed in 1958 by the US Air Force. So the aim of the project was to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon, which would supposedly help in answering some of the mysteries in planetary astronomy and astrogeology. So the flash of explosive light from the nuke would have been faintly visible to people on Earth with their naked eye, which would be a huge show of force, resulting in a huge boosting of domestic morale in the capabilities of either the United States on Earth and in space, in case, space militarization was a thing back then.
It is now.
Yeah, for sure. To be fair, America and the Soviet Union are such places, and John's already touched on how questionable some of their nuclear testing was already, that you probably wouldn't put it past them doing something as stupid as this to try and show off to the world. It was a something more they knew and something they wanted to eradicate before they sent their boys up to the moon.
I suppose if there was life out there, we don't know what form it'd take. And would it even, I don't know, would a you say a nuclear weapon, how powerful it is? What if that did nothing to it? That was like food for them, like they thrived off radiation.
Oh my, can you picture that? You nuke them and they just get stronger.
Do you think a nuke would be sufficient to fight? It's basically the most powerful weapon that we have on this planet.
Just volleys it back to Earth.
You nuke the moon and it knocks it out of orbit and it just plummets towards the Earth.
It'd serve you right, to be honest.
It would.
But I'm not sure how well it would go down with the public. Anyway, nuking it. It's like NASA or the US military say to everyone on Earth, right, found these small life beings, like, say, little rabbits or something on the moon, these little aliens. I was like, oh, what are you going to do to them? Study them? Are you going to bring them back? No, we nuked them.
So yeah, John's kind of mentioned there it's a bit idiotic, and I mean, I can't believe it was ever planned in the first place, but obviously it never went ahead and it was cancelled after worries it could be bad for public relations, which, I mean, who'd have thought that? Perhaps if it had gone ahead and they were able to nuke the moon, then there would have been no worries for the manned Apollo missions, and Armstrong and Aldrin wouldn't have seen anything, and we wouldn't have gone a whole 48 years without going back. So, do world leaders know that there are dangers lurking on the moon? What do you guys think?
I thought as a theory as a whole is brilliant, you know. It's not really one I've ever heard either, that they went there and kind of potentially found aliens or some form of life and spaceship. It's quite interesting the fact, you know, the audio cut out for 2 minutes at quite an important time. And whether it could be coincidence or what, I think it is probably quite likely that they were just trying to set up some sort of delay should something go wrong. But I suppose even if it did go wrong, what's the 2-minute delay anyway? Because you're going to have to come clean and say, yeah, something's gone wrong here. Yeah, there's conspiracy being that we went to the moon, found life, and not only life, but sophisticated life, and covered it up. I think that is pushing a 10. I'm going to go a 9.5. Probably the biggest you could ever think of, other than Prince Philip being coronavirus, obviously. I think in terms of believability, again, it's going to come in slightly lower probably than the Prince Philip coronavirus one. The fact that they would cover it up, I think probably they would cover it up at least for a bit, you know, because it would definitely overshadow the whole achievement of getting to the moon and all that. So maybe they cover it up for a bit. Whether be able to keep it covered up for kind of over 50 years, and it's only now being unveiled on the Co-Conspirators podcast, perhaps unlikely. But I don't know. I think there's some weight to it, certainly. But I think I might have to go for I don't want to sound too harsh, but probably like a 2.5 of believability on this one.
I accept that. I just have one question for you, John.
Go on.
So if you were in charge of NASA and you saw proof of life on the moon and it looked a bit scary, would your first thought be to go and examine it, or leave it alone, or drop a nuke on it?
I think I'd send some people up there to go and examine it first. No, maybe probes, not people. Just send a load of like drones and stuff up there. Maybe put like an iPad on it with Zoom, and you can communicate with them that way. I certainly wouldn't nuke them.
Because I guess this theory does suggest that they knew about it, thought about nuking it, didn't nuke it in case the public reacted badly, and sent their men up there anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
5
fair
further
play.
times.
Yeah, I know. Imagine being the second one. It's like Neil Armstrong's gone back. God, yeah, we saw this spaceship. We were lucky to get out alive. So I take it the next mission's cancelled. Yeah. No, mate, you're on the next flight.
Yeah. Thanks for that, John. What do you think, Calum?
I just think it's utterly fascinating, this moon space talk. I've been really enjoying this podcast, just to put it out there.
Hopefully you're not the only one.
Well, I think lots of people are enjoying this one. It's really, really good. It's like the idea that there's aliens on the moon, we decide to nuke them. I don't think it's particularly high on the believability, but as a conspiracy theory, I should be right up there. We'll give it a 9.
Very nice.
So this was like the audacity someone suggested, like we saw aliens on the moon. So we'll return, but with more firepower next time.
Yeah, of course. Warned off implies they were hostile, then, doesn't it?
It's just such a stereotypical, almost like Earth reaction, though. Thinking all these science fiction movies, Earth's always normally seen as the aggressor. Eradicate it, no questions asked. This thought just play out like as a plot of an amazing science fiction movie.
Yeah, there was a film, I think it was called Apollo 13.
Yeah, that does ring a bell.
Exactly around that plot, yeah.
Maybe it was a documentary, we just didn't know it, of Stanley Kubrick and The Shining. But I think for the believability, I can't put it higher than a 2. Just maybe slightly entertain the idea there might be life out there. But you just wish you could get access to some of these NASA documents and find out was there life on the dark side of the moon. Maybe only Pink Floyd know the answer to that one.
Well, Donald Trump said, didn't he, in his presidential run? Although now I'm saying this could have been Bill Clinton, actually. But either way, a president said the first thing he was going to do if he got elected was read through all the declassified files about like Area 51 and the moon landings. And then he got asked, like later on, oh, did you find anything? And he just kind of brushed up and said, oh, no.
That's the sort of thing you just say on the campaign trails to get a bit of hype about it.
If I became, obviously,
Well,
I
that's
think
my
we
first
can't
order
because
of
I'm not
business.
American. But yeah, I'd definitely read all of that stuff.
Didn't the CIA have to release all its declassified documents on the Cold War?
Yeah, very recently as well, they released all their UFO stuff, and they released, I think it was something like 6 or 8 times where they've found UFOs like in our atmosphere, and they genuinely think they were aliens, and they had to declassify those. Like,
next episode, UFOs, alien sightings.
Oh yeah, I'm up for that.
So one of you can scan through all 13 million declassified CIA documents. Do you think every single page is being read through by someone?
Well, someone would have had to write it.
Well, of course, but I mean, like, since they've been released to the general public.
Oh, no way.
Exactly, so we could be missing some.
Well, true, yeah.
But yeah, I think I agree with you two as well. It's a pretty far-fetched conspiracy, so it's not too believable, but it's quite a fun and interesting one. You know, there are aliens on the moon and we thought about nuking them, but we couldn't in case the public reacted badly. The whole nature of the moon does kind of bring up these kind of conspiracies themselves, because when you think about it, it's pretty crazy that you only ever see one side of the moon in a way.
And I will be touching on that a little bit later on.
But yeah, because of the nature of it, it definitely makes it interesting. So I'm going to give it a 8 out of 10 as a conspiracy. Yeah, and then in terms of believability, it definitely doesn't quite stack up and have as much kind of point evidence as Calum's theory, and I gave Calum's theory a pretty low score, so sadly I'm also going to have to give mine a low score. I mean, a lot of things just don't stack up. Like, if you knew there was life, why would you send missions? If the first mission saw something, then why did you send up more missions? But I guess there are some explanations to it. The thing that would be really interesting for me is if NASA ever released the audio of the 2-minute cutout, because you think if it truly was innocent, then Armstrong and Aldrin would come out and be open about what was said during that 2 minutes.
It's probably just 2 minutes of them going, oh shit, we lagged out.
Yeah, I mean, it would be boring for sure. It does raise a few eyebrows as to why, they haven't actually come out and said what was said during those 2 minutes. But yeah, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10, so not very high. Given that I've just scored my theory a solid 2 out of 10 for believability, having heard the topic of John's theory, I'm going to be very surprised if I score his any higher. Without further ado, let's hear what you got to tell me, John.
Okay, thanks for that, Luke. So I'm going to be looking at some of the theories around the moon perhaps being hollow. The theory that the moon isn't just a rock created in space, it actually might be something more than that. So the first thing that maybe points to this is the fact that the moon's surface is covered in a huge number of craters, to the extent that a lot of the craters even have more craters within them. Whereas if you look at the Earth, there's nowhere near as many. So this is explained by scientists because they state that the lack of a proper atmosphere and wind and running water means that there's little resistance to objects hitting its surface. And there's also no moving geography or civilization like you have on Earth that would cover these craters up.
Is that just exclusively for the light side of the moon?
I'm not sure,
One side does have significantly more craters.
Yeah, I think it does.
But I guess that could just be to do with the Earth's gravitational pull, how it pulls the meteors into the moon.
Yeah, it could well be something to do with that.
Say that was going well on the line. There's a secret alien civilization on the other side.
Yeah, they're just deflecting all the meteors away.
Or they've just been digging plenty of holes.
Yeah, you never know. But the odd thing about all these craters is that they're all pretty much the same depth. So you'd think that craters that are miles wide and were clearly hit by a huge object with an enormous mass would be deeper than those spots hit by considerably smaller pieces of rock. But this isn't actually the case. So this has led many to speculate that the reason for this is a very hard outer shell of the moon just below the surface. So any rock that hits the moon is unable to penetrate this hard layer below. You may initially think that this layer could simply be a layer of harder rock, but with hardness and thickness comes mass. And given we've calculated the mass of the moon using its gravitational pull on other objects and calculated it to be around 1.2% of Earth's mass, it's not possible that there's a deep layer of rock below the surface that would be significantly stronger, thicker and harder. So this has caused many to speculate that this layer beneath the surface may actually be made of metal, providing a metallic barrier beneath the moon rock and dust that prevents any major damage to the moon. So if you're to accept this theory, you may also have to accept the fact that the moon could be hollow, and by extension that it may have even been man or alien made. During the 1969 Apollo 12 mission, during the return back to the Earth, the astronauts dropped the Apollo launch vehicle back onto the moon's surface in order to see what was happening in the centre of the moon and below the surface. Upon impact, something very unexpected happened. The moon was said to have seismically reverberated or rang like a bell for over an hour. Apollo 7 astronaut Walter Cunningham confirmed this and stated that when they crashed the vehicle back to the moon, aimed close to where they'd installed a seismograph to measure motion of the moon's surface and core, caused huge vibrations, which indicated how solid the moon was, and it was deemed far less solid than first estimated. As a result of this, the then head of NASA decided that during Apollo 13, they would intentionally crash a much larger vehicle into the moon and monitor the result. This time, the moon was said to have rang like a gong for over 3 hours and could be heard from around 20 miles away.
That does make you think that they're actually testing these hypotheses. So,
Yeah, I know.
was the actual theory that the moon is hollow, did that come after these moon missions?
I'll come on to it a bit later, what you'd expect to happen. But yeah, I think the theory has definitely been born out of these results.
Because that might be a sort of potential incentive to go back to the moon. We just take some digging and some excavation tools or something to see how far down you can get.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, this result still puzzles many scientists to this day, especially as should something impact the Earth, the sound would last for a couple of minutes at most, and only if the item was enormous. The moon's surface is made up of predominantly a rock called basalt, which is a lightweight rock that absorbs impact really well. The expected outcome of dropping this launch vehicle onto the moon was a thud on impact, where the impact was absorbed, much like if you were to drop a weight on a mattress. When in actuality, the sound created was as though hitting a cymbal with a drumstick. This means the whole of the moon cannot be made up of basalt as originally thought. Could the moon actually be hollow and consist of some sort of metal ring covered in space rock at the surface? The official explanation of the origin of the moon is that it was formed when a huge rock collided with the Earth, stripping away the Earth's outer layer, which flew off as debris, and then combined together over time to create the moon. But this is seen by many as an unacceptable and unlikely explanation.
If that is true, it's pretty incredible, I guess, how science works in such a way that the moon just set itself up in such a perfect location to be perfect for the tidal lock and also perfect for solar eclipse in a way.
Well, this is what I'm going to come on to later. A lot of people think it's kind of too perfect, if you see what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So this theory, well, the original moon's inception theory is that the debris from the Earth just floated up all to one side of the Earth and congregated in a nice ball around, say, a metal sphere or something. Is that what? Obviously not around the metal sphere, that's been added later, but it's just the debris somehow formed into a big cluster that's formed a fairly regular sphere.
Yeah, exactly. That's the official explanation. That basically an asteroid hit the Earth, separated a huge chunk of the Earth off, which then kind of came together over time and formed this ball that we know as a moon, which then obviously got caught in Earth's gravitational pull.
We're definitely sure that just the Death Star wasn't orbiting the moon, the Earth, and tractor beams accidentally activated, pulled a load of this debris and encased itself in sort of a cocoon of Earth dust and basalt.
I mean, yeah. You never know. Death Star's kind of hollow, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Plus, you got the phrase.
Space inside.
Yeah, that's no moon.
Yeah.
Maybe George Lucas knew something that we didn't.
Yeah. So yeah, as Luke kind of touched on, many people point to the incredible coincidence that the sun is around 400 times larger in diameter than the moon, but is also 400 times further away from the Earth than the moon, which means total eclipses of the sun by the moon are possible. The odds of this being an accident are unimaginable, which has made many believe that this isn't actually coincidence, but was intentional. In order for a total eclipse to be possible, the moon has to be this very specific size, which has caused many to believe it's by design.
Can you imagine a total eclipse in like 1500 and people just had no idea what the hell was going on? Like, you probably think the world's about to end.
Yeah, I think they found it documented, like from way back in the day when obviously you don't know, and it basically sounds exactly like that they were terrified. They thought it was like God was coming down, it's Judgment Day kind of thing.
Why the doctors just all prescribed more cocaine. But you just do think that the miracle of life today exists, just sort of these perfect alignment of the stars and everything else, and there's the whole history from the Big Bang up until this point. It boggles your mind sometimes if you just take a moment to sit back and think how we got here.
It's so deep when you look into it, really. Just so many things just kind of add up, and it just makes it so unbelievable. You can look at the moon, but then if you look a bit closer and look at ourselves, the energy we need for life, it takes to make more human life is a pleasurable experience, and it just seems so strange that, everything's aligned in such a way.
So you could argue that from the biology perspective, it's to encourage survival of the human race.
This is probably more for another episode, but it's where evolution comes into play, I guess. Obviously, if making a baby is more enjoyable, you're more likely to pass on your genes and so on and so on. So
yeah, so basically what would have happened in terms of evolution is some sort of genetic mutation that at some point made it pleasurable, that then reproduced more as a result, and then that became the dominant mutated version.
Sadly for people like Calum, it remutated back to being unpleasurable.
Once in a blue moon it happens. Right, moving back to the theory.
Yeah, we've got a bit off topic there.
Yeah, just a bit. So the moon is apparently also, according to gravity, closer to the Earth than an item of its size should be, and is also the only moon in the solar system with a near perfect circular orbit. So basically, I think they're saying if you look at all other moons on other planets and stuff, for something of the moon's size, it would be a lot further away from the Earth. There's no other lunar bodies that we're aware of that have the same impact on their parent planet as the moon does on Earth. So the moon has a huge impact on the Earth's axes, seasons, tides, and without it, life probably wouldn't exist on Earth. Given all of this, you might be forgiven for thinking the moon was built intentionally and was intelligently created and placed there deliberately. Could the moon be some sort of alien surveillance unit used to spy on us? Could the solar eclipses be significant and intentional? US military Project Horizon, and also later on Project Star Wars, as I'm sure Calum was a big fan of,
Oh, I like the sound of that.
were designed so that, quite unbelievably, a military base would be built on the moon by 1966 in order to protect the Earth from potential hostile alien attacks. It was also supposedly built as a tool for the US military to survey and protect the US during the Cold War from any rogue missiles. But it's speculated by many that this military explanation is actually a cover-up for an extraterrestrial defense. Actually, the extraterrestrial defense part is officially listed by the US military as having at one point been a plan. So Project Star Wars in particular, which came in the 80s, was being pushed very hard for a while, that they wanted to put a base on the moon with these kind of missiles that could potentially shoot down any UFOs entering our atmosphere.
How the hell can you justify that?
I know.
Just spend billions and billions in case a UFO comes in.
Probably why it was dropped, although there's people who theorise it wasn't. So perhaps there are aliens living inside or on the dark side of the moon that is tidal locked away from the Earth, so we can't see it. And the moon was placed there to survey the Earth millions of years ago. Perhaps the moon contains some sort of secret underground base, which would explain this kind of metal ring around it to protect it from harm, like the insides of it. And that could be maybe human if you're thinking really out there, or maybe alien. Perhaps the solar eclipses are deliberate and are used for something we're as yet unaware of. Or perhaps the moon is just that, a moon locked into our orbit due to gravity and is made up of materials that maybe we're not fully aware of, which maybe explain the ringing sound. We may never know the truth. So what do you guys reckon on that one?
Am I being really stupid in thinking that there's no sound in space?
Well, I suppose as the alien tagline goes, in space no one can hear you scream, and it is a vacuum, so you can't produce sound in a vacuum.
Or does the moon have, I guess, some kind of... I
The
don't
moon
know.
does have its own atmosphere, but it's just...
Okay.
Very weak.
Yeah, in essence, yeah. But it wasn't so much... Well, I suppose it was a ringing sound that was picked up, but it was picked on the seismograph, which was on the moon.
Okay.
And then it was just almost as a Richter scale explanation. It just kept shaking and letting off this sound as a result, I think.
You say we've never been back to the moon, but we don't fully understand it now if this theory is to be believed, given it arose after the discoveries of the Apollo missions.
So that part about the ringing sound, by the way, that's all 100% true. Like, that can't be called into question. It's all like confirmed by NASA and stuff.
Obviously done multiple samples of rocks from just the surface, but sure you think you try and, I don't know how hard it is with the technology, but dig a little bit deeper, maybe find out, given that people have hypothesized that there could be this metal underlayer underneath the basalt rock, just to further our understanding.
I think as well on top of that is that almost all the samples have been taken on the near side of the moon. And yeah, as we mentioned earlier, it wasn't until 2019 that a rover went to the far side of the moon. That was a Chinese rover, which is kind of surprising that the US didn't want to kind of analyze the far side of the moon themselves, because obviously there's very different conditions on that side. And then also on top of that, I was reading into this Chinese rover, and it just seemed, as you'd expect with China, conspiracy central. People were saying that no one's actually ever really seen any footage from it. And then one guy was saying he saw it on like a dodgy Chinese website, and it literally just looked like it was filmed on a calculator or something. Given the technology you expect that we have at our disposal now, you'd expect if you're sending a rover to the moon, you'd be able to feed back some very good footage. Otherwise, it's kind of a waste.
Yeah, especially when you look at like the SpaceX footage. This is like 1080p, like HD. It's so clear.
Exactly, and if you're spending millions, probably billions, sending a rover to the far side of the moon, surely you'd invest in like a decent camera or something.
Yeah, you'd think so.
Given that's the most important aspect of what you're doing, trying to see what's going on.
To be fair, like, this is a bit of a tangent, but I think if it is all true, the moon landing thing, I think that probably is the most impressive bit, that they were able to stream it back down to Earth live.
Oh, sure, yeah, that always blows my mind.
I don't know the science behind it at all, but that's mad.
I can understand audio for like radio waves, but it's actual television footage.
It had to go back, like 23,000 miles.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you did the math, got your physics equations out, just work out the speed of sound and how long delay would be, yada yada.
But I mean, it could get blocked. Like, I don't know if it's the same thing, but like, people's Wi-Fi signal doesn't even go around their whole house without getting blocked by something. So to get all the way,
human achievement, say it's the pinnacle if it is true.
Oh yeah, comfortably.
I suppose back to the theory then. Do you think we want to give some ratings?
Yeah, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think I really like this one. It's a really good level of conspiracy. We've had sort of the plausible, the unbelievable. I think maybe we might fall somewhere between those two.
Yeah.
Given that NASA has said on record that dropping a big rovers caused a seismograph to register for several hours and also to reportedly produce a sound. And that's not something from the mouth of conspiracy theorists. So there's got to be something we don't fully understand about the surface of the moon, given it for it to respond in this way. Because if it was just a rock, it would either be a lot heavier and it would affect gravitational pull, or there is something we don't fully know about it. As a conspiracy on the whole, give it a solid 8.5. I like this one a lot as well. And of course, you do like the angles, like the more far out things. It could be an alien base or a US military installation. They actually have sent fleets of workers to tunnel in and build a massive, just say, a Death Star, because it's very round, weaponized battle station to protect the Earth against asteroids and UFOs. But if you go down that route, the believability is not so high. But if you want to take the angle that we don't fully understand, like the physical properties of our closest lunar, say, landmark, I think I'll give it maybe a 4 out of 10. As it's maybe not hollow, but it's not all rock. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, they actually don't have an official explanation, even now, as to why it rang. But it still baffles scientists. If you picture something as hollow, which is more where the theory comes from, say it was a metal ring with hollow, it is going to ring because the sound vibrations are going to bounce around inside it.
I keep thinking of it as an Easter egg. Whenever you mention hollow, that's my first thought.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way of looking at it.
Sure, there's now we're going to be the ones that trigger us to go back to the moon, but we don't know exactly what it is, so let's go back. Maybe once coronavirus goes away.
There's no coronavirus in space.
Colonize the moon, let's go. Unless it's already been done.
Yeah. Luke, do you want to give your take?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting conspiracy, and I like how sound ringing around for 3 hours kind of leads itself to many other conspiracies just because there's no official explanation. And the earlier theories I said as well that, potentially some kind of alien spaceship or anything like that, and that's why they wouldn't have wanted to go back. It really does blow my mind that given there's so much still unexplained about the moon, and I mean, in relative terms, it's pretty close. We haven't done more to explore it. So overall, I'm going to give it a solid 8 as a conspiracy. In terms of believability that the moon's hollow, kind of just goes against everything you've ever heard or ever believed. And so it's obviously, if we haven't explored it, there's no reason to say that it's not believable. And given the ringing sound, I'm going to say it's quite plausible. Didn't expect to be giving it this high, but I'm going to give it a 4.5.
Very nice. Right. For me, I really enjoyed looking into this theory, and it's something I saw on a documentary probably a year ago, and I remember kind of seeing the title of something like Hollow Moon or whatever, thinking, oh, this is going to be ridiculous, but I'll watch it. And then I remember thinking, God, this is incredible. There's all this stuff I'd never found out, and it's always kind of stuck in my mind since. So yeah, in terms of believability, I suppose you've got to go with the theory of it being almost completely hollow other than it's out of shell, and I think that would be very unlikely because I don't know whether things can naturally form that way, so it kind of lends itself to maybe being built or something along those lines. So I think for it being completely hollow, I might stick with a 4. In terms of stuff like that we don't know about its structure, and it could have this kind of metal ring around it, I think you have to go a lot higher than that on believability because there's not too many explanations that can really explain it. There's certainly no mainstream ones yet. So yeah, in terms of maybe the believability of it being a kind of alien surveillance unit or something like that used to spy on us, and that explains, as much as that theory explains its close proximity to the Earth and all these weird coincidences, I think it's so far-fetched that the believability just plummets as soon as you get into that kind of area. But yeah, really enjoyed this theory as a whole, and I'm gonna give it a 8.5 out of 10.
Right, just before we close out the episode, is there a movement for like, hollow mooners in the same guise as the flat earthers? Because I'm well into signing up for that.
I don't know. They probably get a bit more respect. They probably have a go at flat earthers have been nutters. Just looking now, it has got its own Wikipedia entitled Hollow Moon. Oh yeah, there is a Reddit, Hollow Mooners. There you go.
Oh, there we go. when you read it. I'm going to be
Yeah.
browsing through that later.
To be fair, there's definitely, I guess, more evidence for a spherical Earth than a, rocky moon.
Exactly.
So I wouldn't call them too crazy.
And maybe we'll touch on flat Earth at a later date. You never know.
Nothing's off the table.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, John. That rounds up our 3 conspiracies for you. And now we're going to jump straight into our fans' favourite game, Conspiracy. So, if you're new to the podcast, Conspiracy is a game where I, the host, have 3 conspiracies for my co-host. 2 of these are conspiracies that are really out there on the internet, and one of these are one that I've completely made up myself. And it is John and Calum's job to work out which one I've made up. So, without further ado, let's get into the game. So, conspiracy number 1. John F. Kennedy was assassinated by NASA to ensure that America won the space race. Conspiracy number 2. Humans first landed on the moon in 2309 BC. And conspiracy 3. When Galileo first saw the moon through his telescope, he calculated the zoom of the telescope wrong, and hence calculated the size of the moon wrong, and that lie has been kept till today.
Yeah, so do you want to give us maybe a bit more info on them, try and aid our decision-making process?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a bit more information on each one. So in terms of JFK, he wasn't too excited about America's mission to go to the moon. And actually, days before his assassination, he even went as far as suggesting that America and Russia should work together on the project. And obviously for NASA, that was a huge no, it was a space race and there was no way they were going to work with the Soviet Union on it. And he also met with NASA to discuss if it was worth having a manned mission to the moon, as we all know JFK was quite a revolutionary leader and didn't really want to spend billions and billions of dollars to go to the moon. In terms of humans first landing on the moon in 2309, it comes from Chinese history, and it goes that the engineer Ho Yi and his wife Chang No flew to the moon on a celestial bird. Now, usually you might put this down to kind of like fiction stories, but their descriptions of the conditions of the moon were so incredibly accurate that people today, they must have visited the moon. In terms of Galileo, it's quite a simple one. It just states that when he saw the moon through a telescope, he had his calculations of the zoom wrong, and so he calculated the size of the moon wrong. However, when Galileo realized this, it kind of gone worldwide, and it was such a proud moment for Italy and Italian science. They never announced a wrong calculation. And still to this day, the Pope exerts his influence to cover this up, and this conspiracy has kind of come out because... So apparently, according to this conspiracy, telescope companies to this day do the readings wrong, so that you never have a correct reading, and so you can't tell that the moon's the wrong size. But then apparently, like, people who have made their own telescopes have kind of come out and said, look, the moon's this size, but apparently they've always been shut down.
Right. That's not that Chinese one. Because you say when
Are you jumping in straight away? I was going to ask a couple of questions.
No, I'm not going to jump in. I just did a bit of discussion, I think.
Oh, okay.
Said it's not based on myth. I found that quite interesting. So they're able to give vivid descriptions. I'm not sure what the telescopic capabilities of Chinese astronomers were in 2300 BC.
Yes, so essentially, when Ho Yi flew into space, supposedly, he didn't perceive the rotary movement of the sun. And this is huge because at the time, everyone believed that everything revolved around the Earth. And this kind of disproved it. And it was written way more years before Galileo himself kind of came up with the theory.
So he was a heliocentrist rather than a geocentrist, which was revolutionary at the time.
And you say that's documented?
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Just a couple of questions on the first one. I won't rule you too hard because you won't have researched anywhere near enough as your actual theory. On the JFK one, he might have just been the spokesperson, but wasn't it his idea kind of thing? Because he was very much the one who said we'll do it by the end of the decade and all that.
So JFK did say that, but he didn't really appreciate the cost of it. We mentioned earlier that in today's money, that one moon mission was $250 billion, which around now is about 10% of America's total GDP. And given that and the fact there was 6 planned missions to the moon, that would have been, 60%. I'm not sure if it worked out that way back then, but an incredible amount of the GDP. And as soon as JFK really realized this, he kind of tried to slow it down and even went as far as suggesting that they work with Russia to kind of save cost.
Was he threatening to pull the plug and denounce it publicly? That's why they killed him.
Yeah, I think it was a mixture of threatening to pull the plug, but also NASA just weren't happy that he told them to work with Russia because, they'd worked so hard on focusing on America winning the space race and they didn't want to work with the Soviets.
Okay.
I suppose he also did make that original statement in 61 and the Apollo program started in 63. So before he's even seen the first bill or invoices coming in for the Treasury, all of Kubrick's production costs can't become cheap. given they were filming for the moon and also 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Exactly. So with the Galileo one, are NASA scientists aware of this? Because you have to know the moon's size in order to calculate a route and how to get there and how much fuel you need and stuff like that. So do they know the real size?
Yeah, they do. This theory, when I looked at it, is kind of suggesting that it's the Pope who's been exerting his influence to cover this up, and kind of ties in with JFK in a way, because JFK was a huge Catholic and the Pope was able to influence him to keep this under wraps. So to this day, NASA still kept it secret, because, I mean, if NASA were to come out today and say, oh, by the way, we've been lying about the size of the moon the whole time, I think people would go pretty mental.
Do you know when it was discovered that it was wrong?
So Galileo realized about a year after he first saw the moon.
Because if you're saying NASA and the Pope are keeping it quiet, did no one notice before then?
Sure. So it took Galileo a year to discover it was wrong. But by this time, it had kind of been such a huge success for Italian science. They didn't want it to get out. And there was, I mean, it was the 1500s, but there was still a community of top scientists in Italy at the time. And Galileo went to them and they all kind of agreed that it should be kept under wraps. And they used the Pope because the Pope was proud of the Italian discovery, and the Pope still exerts his influence today.
Plus, I mean, you can imagine, even as a committed scientist, no one wants to admit that they're wrong, and especially when something on 1500s viral.
And I mean,
it's very hard to get that information back out there. Sorry, guys, I'm wrong. It's just through word of mouth and through some letters. You can't.
I guess as well, even though Galileo was so far ahead of his time with his calculations as well, that people kind of just took his word for it.
Yeah.
And just assumed that other calculations were wrong.
This is a really tough one again, I think.
Yeah, it is. They're getting harder by the week.
Maintaining the high bar from last week, that's for sure.
I'll let you go first, Calum.
I went
first last week.
Fine, I'm prepared to take a stab. And I think it's almost like against my better judgment here. I'm going to say that the first one is the conspiracy. Even though seeing implicated JFK's assassination as the work of NASA is very likely in the world of conspiracies that we live in, they've got quite a lot of detail to them, and quite niche details. Well, even Luke is a connoisseur of Asian history. I mean, it just seems too specific to make that up. You've got a brilliant imagination, both of them. But I think this one, just because it's a bit more recent, it's probably easier to maybe join the dots. I'm going to say that the JFK one is the conspiracy.
What about you, John?
Well, what I'm about to say, I have said before, and it backfired on me. But I'm sure I've heard the Galileo one before, so I'm going to rule that out based on that. And then it's between the other two. And kind of as Calum said, the second one is so random and so out there that you feel like you kind of made it up. The only thing that's making me think maybe you have is maybe that's all true apart from the moon, and maybe you're talking about the sun or something else, that he's flown to the sun. And because I remember Calum changed one from Prince Philip being a vampire to Prince Charles, or the other way around. So I'm wondering whether you've done a similar thing and piggybacked off one, changed it slightly. But I am going to actually agree with Calum and say that I think the first one is the one you've made up, the JFK one.
Okay.
Spreading the word, it's a win for conspiracy.
Yeah.
I can tell you that this week it is a win for conspiracy.
Got it.
So there is a theory out there that JFK was assassinated by NASA to ensure America won the space race. And yeah, as I mentioned, this theory plays on apparently JFK suggesting that America and the Soviet Union should work together on the project. And apparently he also had a meeting with James Webb, who was director of NASA at the time, where he questioned the worth of the manned mission, as it just seemed way too expensive. Chinese tradition. This is just a true story. I mean, it's clearly a myth, but some of the descriptions of the moon were so incredibly accurate, it kind of led people to believe that they had traveled to the moon. And then, yeah, I totally made up the Galileo one, so that's backfired massively on John.
That's happened twice. I was convinced I'd heard that Galileo got those.
I was as well. I thought I might have heard that somewhere. So I had to say top marks for that game. That was really good.
Yeah, well played.
I must say, I'd rather be confidently wrong than sort of timidly going with an answer.
Yeah. I think we need to keep a running log of what the score is.
Yeah, we can title them up for this episode next week, see how we're doing. I don't know why I thought everything's there for conspiracy theorists to go wild with JFK assassination theories.
It was so likely as a conspiracy that it became unlikely.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there are some conspiracies about Galileo out there as well, but I did try and check this one before going for it, so... I mean, hopefully, fingers crossed, it's not out there.
I mean, that's the thing, though. Even when you were pressed on it, you're still coming up with answers. I think that's definitely some articles you've read there.
Yeah, it pays to be good at making shit up, I guess, in this game. All right, so that's it for this episode, and thank you for tuning in again. We really appreciate all your support, and yeah, whether you're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, wherever you are, thanks for listening, and yeah, keep challenging the status quo.
Cheers, guys.
Ta-da.